Find somewhere comfortable. There is no need to sit up, no need to focus. You do not have to follow this closely or remember any of it. Simply let the words come to you, the way a slow river arrives at the shore, without effort, without announcement. Tonight we are going somewhere ancient, somewhere warm and wide and unhurried. We are going to the edge of a great river, where a civilization once settled itself into the rhythms of water and season and sky. A place where life was arranged not by clocks or calendars, but by the slow, patient rising of a flood. You may close your eyes if that feels right, or let your gaze go soft, resting on nothing in particular. There is nothing required of you tonight. No questions to answer, no details to retain. The river has been flowing for a very long time, and it will carry these words gently, and you may simply drift alongside them. We are in no hurry. The Nile has waited 5,000 years. It can wait a little longer. Breathe. Let the day go quiet somewhere behind you. We begin. There is something deeply settling in the idea that an entire way of life was built not on conquest or invention or the accumulation of things, but on waiting. The ancient Egyptians waited every year for the same thing. They watched the sky in a particular way. They watched the river. And when the water began to rise, slowly, without drama, darkening as it came, they understood that the world was beginning again. The Nile flooded every year. It had been doing so long before there were people to notice, and it continued long after the great temples had begun to crumble. But for the Egyptians, this flood was not a disaster. It was not something to be feared or fled from. It was the most important moment of the year, the moment everything depended on. They called it Akhet, the season of inundation. Let that settle. The water that arrived each summer in Egypt had begun its journey far away. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the summer rains were falling. The Blue Nile was swelling, carrying with it something extraordinary. Not just water, but soil. Dark, rich, mineral-laden silt, the color of charcoal, eroded from ancient volcanic rock in those distant mountains and carried thousands of miles downstream. When that water spread across the Egyptian floodplain, it left behind a gift, a thin, dark layer of the most fertile earth in the world. The ancient Egyptians noticed the color. They called their country Kemet. It meant the Black Land, not for darkness or sorrow, but for the color of that extraordinary soil, the rich, dark gift left by the retreating water. Beyond it, in every direction, stretched the Red Land, the desert, inhospitable and still. The Black Land was life. The Red Land was everything else. Imagine standing at the edge of that flood, the water arriving slowly, over days and weeks, spreading out across the flat plain, quiet and vast and patient. Farmers watching from slightly higher ground. Children, perhaps, running to the water's edge before being called back. Priests reading the height of the river from stone markers. The Nilometers, carefully carved and positioned along the banks. Too little water, and the crops would fail. Too much, and the villages themselves would be consumed. But the right amount, the gentle, measured arrival of just enough, that was abundance. That was another year of life. There is something almost meditative about the way Egyptian daily life arranged itself around this cycle. There were 3 seasons, not 4. Akhet, the flood, which lasted roughly from June through September. Pere, the growing season, when the waters receded and seeds could be pressed into that dark, still damp earth. And Shemu, the dry season, the harvest, when the land baked and the river shrank back to its channel, patient and quiet, gathering itself for the following year. An entire civilization, inhaling and exhaling, rising and falling. Every year, for 3,000 years. You may have drifted. That is fine. What is quietly remarkable about daily life on the Nile is how deeply ordinary it was, in the most peaceful sense of that word. Farmers woke early, before the heat arrived. They walked their fields along narrow paths between irrigation channels. The air would have been cool still, the light low and golden across the water, egrets standing in the shallows, the soft sound of the river moving past. Wheat and barley were the great crops. From them came bread and beer, the two foundations of the Egyptian diet. Almost everyone ate both, from the farmer in his small village to the worker building monuments in the desert heat. Bread was baked each morning. Beer was brewed with a patient, unhurried process. The grain fermented in large clay vessels, the smell of it warm and yeasty and familiar. These were not luxuries. They were simply what life was made of. The river gave other things too. Papyrus grew thick along the banks, those tall, feathery reeds that swayed in the delta breeze. From them the Egyptians made boats, lightweight and graceful, poled through the shallow marshes. They made baskets and sandals and rope. And eventually, famously, they made paper, a surface on which thoughts could be set down and carried forward through time, as the river carried soil downstream. Fish were plentiful. Catfish and tilapia were pulled from the water and dried in the sun, preserved for later. Waterfowl were hunted in the marshes, a practice that appears again and again in the paintings found deep inside tombs. Those images are among the quietest, most domestic pictures to survive from any ancient civilization. A man standing in a small papyrus boat, his arm raised, birds rising around him. His wife seated beside him, one hand resting on his leg. Children watching. Water everywhere. There is no rush. The Nile was also the road. There were no great paved highways in ancient Egypt. The desert discouraged travel overland, and the narrow strip of cultivated land along the river left little space for roads of any consequence. But the river itself was a highway, wide and patient, flowing north to the sea. The prevailing winds in Egypt blow from the north, which meant that boats could sail upstream by raising their sails and drift downstream with the current when the sails were lowered. North and south, coming and going, the river made movement simple. Villages traded. Grain was transported. Stone was floated on barges from quarries to building sites. The enormous blocks of the temples and monuments moved slowly and patiently on the surface of the water. Life happened on the riverbank. Almost everything happened on the riverbank. Washing clothes at the water's edge. Children swimming in the shallows, though their parents likely worried about crocodiles, which were both revered and feared, large and unhurried in the deeper channels. Women filling clay pots with water and carrying them home on their heads. A cool, heavy weight against the growing heat of the morning. Homes were built from mud brick, a practical and gentle material. The river provided it in abundance. Mud mixed with straw and water, pressed into moulds, left to dry in the sun. Thick walls that held the cool of the night against the heat of the afternoon. Small windows set high. Flat roofs where families slept during the hottest months. Under a sky so densely scattered with stars that it must have felt like being held inside something infinite. Just the sound of the words. The ancient Egyptians did not seem to regard the river as a thing apart from themselves. It was not simply a resource. It was a presence, as familiar and constant as breathing. The god Hapi, who embodied the Nile flood, was depicted as a gentle, rounded figure, carrying offerings of food and flowers. Not fierce, not mighty in the usual sense, simply generous, nourishing, associated with abundance and with a kind of quiet satisfaction. There is something in that image worth resting with for a moment. A civilization that worshipped generosity, that venerated the annual gift of dark soil and measured water, that organized its entire calendar around the patience required to wait for the river to do what it had always done. The flood did not rush. The soil settled slowly. The seeds were pressed into the earth, and the growing season was long and unhurried. The harvest came in its own time. Even the river's name in the ancient Egyptian language was simply the word for river itself. Eat-W. The river. As though there were only one in the world, and everyone already knew which one was meant. 5,000 years have passed since a farmer walked to the water's edge in the early morning. The air still cool, the birds moving in the reeds. And still the river flows, still moving north, still patient, still carrying within it those faint traces of Ethiopian rain and distant soil. The delta has changed. The floods have been stilled by great dams. The Nilometers still stand in some places, their ancient markings worn smooth. But something of that rhythm persists. Something slow and vast and ancient that no dam can quite stop. The way a river knows where it is going, even when nothing hurries it. Let that settle somewhere quiet. You have travelled a long way tonight, to a warm and ancient place. A river that ran through the middle of everything, and made life possible, and was simply called the river, because nothing else needed to be said. The flood always came. The soil always settled. The fields were always planted. There was always another year, and so we leave it there. Somewhere behind you, the day is already distant. The Nile is still flowing, softly, through the dark. The black land is resting. The fields are still. The stars are very deep tonight, and there is nothing needed from you now. Drift, if you are ready. Let the words go the way the flood recedes, slowly, leaving only something quiet and dark and good. Sleep well.